Okay, in Lightwave I've just created a rectangular box, very slim depth, just to demonstrate sort of a brick wall that we can do with this. And I've already gone ahead and loaded in all of our image. We have a color, our two bump maps, and our diffusion map. Let's just go ahead and set those to the actual surface of this object. So we'll grab our color map and just take a look and see if we need to make it any larger. I think we'll do 2 meters. So we can start to see already within the preview some of the tiling that we have, mostly defined by this white area here, that really shows up. Also, these two light bricks right next to each other are creating a more dramatic tiling effect. But let's go ahead and load the rest in here. And like I said, the tiling cannot be avoided, especially when you're using images like this. But we have reduced a lot of the tiling by removing some of the major artifacts that would show up. Most of the tiling has been removed, but we do still have these few areas that you could obviously just go back to the color map and sort of edit those brick textures if you wanted to just sort of reduce that. And we'll select our diffusion map, set that so it matches up, and I'll also bring this down so it's not such a large effect, because diffusion maps do have a tendency of darkening a texture, sometimes too much. And now with the bump map, we're going to have two layers. So we'll first layer, we'll add bump 2. Actually, we'll add bump 1 as the first layer. We'll set this to 2 meters, pixel blending. Texture amplitude of this one I'll set to 2, and then I'm going to add another layer. Grab bump 2, turn off pixel blending because we have a very high resolution photo. We don't need pixel blending, and I'm going to turn this one up to a texture amplitude of 10. And actually, what we could do is maybe change the blending mode to multiply. And actually, 10 might be too much, so we'll go to 5. Use texture. I'll set our light, shine directly on it. Zoom in just a little. Edit the camera. Just add a little bit of anti-aliasing on there. Make a little bit of larger render. And let's take a look and see how this overall frame looks with everything all in there. And then I'll go ahead and remove certain parts of the object so we can see how much the bump map really affects it and how much each individual map we've created really affects this texture. Okay, here's with all different maps on there: bump map, color map, diffusion map. And now I'm going to go back into the surface editor, and first I'll remove our bump map, and we can go ahead and render that and see how that's going to look, just so we can see how much of an effect that really adds to it. And in some cases it won't add very much, but as you can see, now it looks much smoother. So if we switch back and forth between the different textures, we can see the illusion of depth that is created by adding the bump map. And it may not be much, it could be very subtle, but enough, depending on the angle that you're looking at, to really add that extra little bit of realism in there. And we can really see it along these lines on that brick there. Just that bit of depth that we add to it. So it really darkens up those areas and keeps the rest of it light. Of course, we can intensify that as well if we wanted to, the overall bump map. If you want to make it more dramatic, you obviously could. And now I'll just go ahead and remove that diffusion map. A diffusion map can also play a large role in how your texture is going to look. And let's just go ahead and render it without the diffusion, which is going to look very bright, as we can see. And it almost looks washed out, although that might be the effect you're going for with specific lighting that you have. That really depends, of course, on the scene that you're creating. But let's just go back and take a look with all of our textures, or all of our maps applied, without the bump map, and now without the diffusion map. So overall, I think the first one looks a lot better. If we want a brighter scene, we can increase the light, but we still want to keep that diffusion on there, because how we diffuse the light is very important. So keeping with a real world look. So this texture looks pretty good. We can also zoom in and move our camera in. Since we have such a large texture here, we don't have to worry about getting too close and losing depth or losing any image quality. Of course, in our preview right now it looks a little pixelated, but let's just go ahead and render that, and we can see how it looks. And you can see that's very crisp, at least for the most part. We might be in a little bit farther than 100% of the texture, but comparatively to how we were before, this is still a very crisp image, and it looks really good, which is one reason why I like some of the larger scale textures. You'll see with some of the texture collections, pretty much all of them are 8 megapixel textures, so that we can zoom in, but also when we're out, it still looks good, and zoomed out, we can have a neat look here. One way to kind of reduce tiling, I'll just show you really quick. With a texture like this, what we might want to do is add a separate part of diffusion to that, and diffusing this texture with the procedural can reduce a lot of that tiling. And we'll go and check this out in the diffusion. We'll just create a procedural texture. It doesn't have to be that special of a texture. And then we'll just go ahead and render that. And this is, of course, without our diffusion map on. And it doesn't look like this specific diffusion procedural is going to do a whole lot. So I'll have to change it maybe to an additive or a subtractive. And then with the subtractive, we can really see how that's going to look. Maybe we'll make it a little bit bigger, 0.7. And this will add dark areas. And what we can do is just lower the opacity. Just so we can see the dark areas, but they're not something that would become dominant. But it will help reduce tiling because it will not match up with the texture because it's a different size, of course. And even by making odd numbers and things like that, we can also reduce that number. So we could do 713.764, and just numbers that aren't very typical but still close to each other. Use texture, and then I'll go ahead and render that frame. And we can still see that we have some of these dark areas of the texture in there, but by adding that procedural, we've kind of blocked out certain areas, and it does reduce the tiling effect. We can, of course, go the larger texture, a little bit darker with diffusion, maybe offset it a little so these dark spots are down lower, and that could change that effect as well. So there's a lot you can do with it. But overall, this texture looks really nice now, and it's a very workable texture.